Sherry said, give this talk in November, it will be timely. I was doubting this summer, but it does seem to be a good time to do it. So, first of all, I am going to talk about what is a rain garden. This might or might not be familiar to you. Basically, a rain garden is an area, it's a low spot that you use to capture runoff and let it percolate into the ground. Frequently in residential landscapes, you're talking about the downspouts off your roof or rain chains or whatever. Rain gardens have been around for a longer time in public areas. In fact, on many freeway cloverleafs, that depression is a rain garden. They're capturing the runoff from the ramps and the area under the underpass, and it goes into, you notice that there's frequently a low spot there and they've got plants there, and they're typically rain gardens. This is a diagram here that I pulled off the web. You know, when I put in my rain garden we started planning it in 2009, and I had trouble finding a lot of good reference material specifically for California. Most of the stuff I found was actually citing things in the East. So I had to, it was kind of a bit of a leap of faith. But now, I looked recently when I was doing this talk, there's a lot of information on the web. Many different municipalities have created nice little short summaries of rain gardens, because of course everyone realizes that it'd be really great if not only public places that are required to put in percolation, to handle their runoff, if more people started doing this in houses, it would have so many benefits, as I'll go into later. And this is one of my favorites here, and it's on the back of that little handout that has plants on it. I put this, and there's a book now. This is a great book. It was published in 2012, after my rain garden was actually pretty well established. I'm saying, boy, this would have made my life less stressful if it was around before. So, rain gardens really are win-win-win. From a community point of view, when you capture runoff from your yard, you're preventing it from going into storm drains. I think you know that what happens in large storms, these massive amounts of water go in, overwhelm systems, and they can actually end up with sewage going out into the bay. Even if that doesn't happen, the runoff through the streets puts pollutants directly into our streams and ultimately the ocean. But by having that water go into the ground, microorganisms really clean the water. And of course, you get the benefit of enriching the water table in your yard for your plants. And if you have native plants, they're really happy to get lots of extra water in the winter. That's when they expect it. And also, rain gardens tend to be pretty low tech. I mean, there's high-tech ways of harvesting tons of rainwater. This is the easy way. And then you also have the benefit of being able to plant species, more water-loving species, riparian plants, that otherwise you'd have to give a lot of extra water to. And those, in fact, riparian habitats are some of the most threatened habitats in California. We've lost an incredible number of them. And by planting, we have lots of little rain gardens that would do a bit for the birds, the butterflies, the insects that depend on those plants, and because so many stream sides have been bulldozed. And this is one sample of a public rain garden I found on the web, and you can see these when you start noticing. You can see them all over with new construction, where there's curb cuts and the runoff from paved areas goes into them. This is by Brisbane City Hall. And a lot of times these public gardens, especially where low maintenance is especially critical, they use a lot of California rush, which is of course a very tough plant. It's really great at filtering water, and this has native grasses. And as you see, it's not all natives because it looks like they have some phormiums, the New Zealand phormiums around the edges. So what do you need to do to start off to create your own rain garden? The first thing is you have to observe how water flows across your yard. You know, what are the patterns of drainage? Because if you want to put one in a place, you want it to be, you know, ideally downstream of your downspouts, rain chains, or you could even be doing it to harvest water runoff from driveway or other paved areas. But most frequently in a residential setting, you're looking at your downspouts. And to avoid problems, it's really good to put it at least 10 feet away from your house, because you don't want the chance of water sitting against your foundation. That's a recipe for mud termites, among other things. And I think for most, this is probably true in most municipalities, and I think it's good neighborly in any case, to keep it 5 feet from property lines. And it's not a question of whether your rain garden will overflow. In large storm events, it will. So the other thing that you have to do is, you don't want it overflowing randomly. You want to plan where the overflow will go. You want it to go someplace that's not harmful. So that's one of the things you always have to think about, is there a place for a rain garden to overflow? Now, a lot of the texts, of course, have a lot in there about soil and amending the soil and all kinds of things. And that can be kind of daunting, and we didn't do any of that. I have fairly heavy clay. We dug down. I don't really have a problem with the water infiltrating, we had some fairly wet winters afterwards, and I never had water sitting in my basin for more than a day. I mean, the rule of thumb is you don't want it to sit there for more than 2 days. After that, you will have mosquito problems. So maybe if you have hard pan, you might have to think about breaking that up and putting some gravel, but don't get too intimidated by that. I have pretty heavy clay and I have not had troubles, and we didn't do anything. Rain gardens can be really, really simple. You've got a downspout. It can go into an area where the water is, first of all, if you have stones or something like that, if there's a heavy flow, you want to slow it down. And you want plants to soak up the water. Plants also hold the roots together. And so that's really all that you need, and you need a place to have it overflow. So after I put in my rain garden, I realized in my house I had a 40-year-old rain garden. This is a 40-year-old lemon tree, I believe. The neighbors said it was planted right after the house was built. And it's by the garage. This downspout takes all the water off the front garage roof, and it's a fairly large garage. So it all gets dumped at the foot of this lemon tree. I'll show in the next picture, it has an overflow route down the driveway. Whoops. Here. It can overflow down the driveway. I've actually never seen it flowing out of here down the driveway. The lemon tree it's actually perfectly sized, I guess, for that amount, for the garage runoff to all get soaked up by that lemon tree. And I must say that lemon tree can be very productive. It likes getting all that rain at its feet in a wet winter. So that's how simple a rain garden can be. And if you have if you want to compute, if you're digging a basin, how big should it be? What we did is we took, my took the area of the roof that we were doing, the area times an inch, which would be like an inch of rain, computed the volume, and then figured out the basin we dug had to equal that volume. It's fairly basic geometry, but here they have a table that kind of gets you almost there. And the other thing too is the rain garden area should be roughly 4% of the contributing area, which means in many cases your rooftop. In most cases your rooftop. So the rain garden we put in is for our backyard. This is the original backyard. Well, not completely original because this is after we sheet mulched the lawn. But we remodeled our house in 2000. And there's sidewalks along the back of the house, and we have a deck on the back. So the downspouts always went under those. It was kind of mysterious, but after a rain, the very back corner, where you see that flowering tree, which happens to be an elderberry, back there it would get soggy after a rain. So I presume some kind of dry well or something was put there. So then when they remodeled, they wanted to solve our drainage problem. And so the downspouts were connected to a sump pump. This backyard is almost level. And we got a permit, and the sump pump would direct water out past the house into the street. I didn't know any better, but I was sending my runoff into the storm sewers. Wrong. So when we were redoing the backyard, I had learned that this is not what we want to do. So we were looking for a solution. And here is the site that we have. It's Google Earth. So you see it's an L-shaped house. The rain garden takes the rear part of that roof. There's like three areas of where the runoff is directed. The back roof, the garage roof, which goes to you can see the driveway, that segment goes to the lemon tree, and the front, which goes to a dry well. And this is where we computed the area of this roof to calculate how big our rain garden should be. And this is the original plan for the backyard. When we redid it, we took out a pool, took out the lawn, and you can see there's a kind of tadpole-shaped thing, which is a drainage ditch, and that's our rain garden. The drainage ditch, all the hardscape here, which is actually gravel and decomposed granite, slightly slopes. So any runoff goes into that ditch, all of this stuff, and it goes here, and the downspouts are directed back there. But we went through a lot of different schemes. Getting water into this rain garden was more complicated because the downspouts were underground. If your downspouts are above ground, it's a lot simpler. So we were like, do we dig everything up and start over? And we decided not to do that, to take what was already going to the sump pump, instead of sending it to the street, to send it to the rain garden. And not, if we started over from total scratch, we could design a simpler system, but sometimes you don't want to dig up everything and get rid of concrete. So this is more complicated than many rain gardens have to be. So there we are, starting construction. And of course, it took us a while to decide what to do. After about 9 months of sitting under mulch, that grass was gone. It's like magic. Sheet mulching is magic. So this is the ditch that ran along the side. Here's the construction, and we were surprised to find out the cheapest way to make a little bridge across it was to use stone as opposed to wood. Who knew? But you see the level of the depression there. It's not super deep, but that is now the low spot in the yard that leads into the rain garden. Here's how big the rain garden is. And you may say, why are we putting irrigation in the rain garden? Well, the kind of plants that can take being sitting with a foot of water on them are riparian plants. And so they live in places where there tends to be a closer water table. You need water to get them established. In the right location, you can cut off the summer water after a while. But if you don't have any irrigation in your rain garden, you might be kind of limited to just Juncus, California rush, which is a great plant, but I do find large masses of it kind of boring. It's not in my rain garden. I have it in other places in my yard. I was lusting after plants I couldn't have any other place. And this is an intermediate stage before we buried this pipe to have this pipe is leading from the sump pump which is near our compost bin into the bottom of the rain garden. And here you can get a little better idea of how big the plants were that we planted. This was in January of 2011, and we were quite lucky. During the construction of this, we had a very dry December. And pretty much the week after this was completed, it started raining. It started raining heavily. And these are the plants that we put in there. The shrubs are spice bush, the Cornus sericea, the red twig dogwood or American dogwood, and California ninebark, the Physocarpus. And we chose a grass it's actually very tolerant of both. It's pretty tolerant of drought, but it also does not mind water. It grows naturally in seeps. Alkali sacchaton, it's a beautiful grass. Does reseed a little bit, but it's not terrible. And we put the stream orchid in the ditch. And we did find out we just didn't get much water in that ditch. We really do have to hand water that orchid to keep it going. And you'll see some of these plants as they develop. And I might have somewhat overplanted. My curse as a gardener, even with a designer trying to restrain me. So this shows the layout of what we did with that big area where we placed the lawn. We put in raised beds. Those are for vegetables. The ditch is on your left, and the rain garden is in the back behind the raised beds. And this is finishing up the paths and stuff. This is decomposed granite, and we have a gravel area. So decomposed granite doesn't technically count as a permeable surface, but in my experience it's pretty permeable, which is why I think we don't actually get a lot of runoff into our ditch. It's not like concrete. So this is the first year. We've got plants there. They've just been planted. It's January, so they're not very spectacular. And you may ask, that looks like a drainage grate. Well, actually, we had a plastic cover for where the water came out, but it kept blowing off because we have a sump pump that puts out the water with some force, and tried several. So finally they brought this concrete public utility drainage grate, and I said, that's so ugly, and they said, after a while you won't see it. It was hard to believe that at this point, but that is true. And the other little round thing is our overflow. The overflow we rigged up here takes it into that original channel that went out to the street. And that's one of the things. Whenever you have overflow, you really are going to end up putting it into the street. There isn't much choice when you have a massive storm event. But at least you're not going to put as much as you would if you had no rain garden. And this picture I took a week ago. This shows water coming out of the grate. I managed to go out there right when it was emitting, because the sump fills up, and when it's full, it sends water to the water garden. So here it is. And that was a very welcome sight, because I hadn't really seen the rain garden active for a while, considering that we've had a drought. But that's how it works. It doesn't actually let water in, it sends water out. And here in the first year, this shows the rain garden full. That's one of the covers for the emitter that failed. I think you see like the red twig dogwood in the middle gets pretty well inundated. And that's one of the things to think about, things that, like the grasses are kind of more, but they don't always get totally soaked, they're more on the edge. But red twig dogwood does not mind being in a couple feet of water. And this is a view, you can see there's a few puddles on the decomposed granite, but they don't last long. This, I guess, is very late winter, early spring, because our berry is starting to bloom. And this also shows what you can do with the dirt that you take out of a rain garden. You build a mound. So we have a mound here, and we use that to plant a Catalina ironwood, a Linothamnus. We took out a really ugly, broke down evergreen pear. I decided to go whole hog and replace those evergreen pears, which I've always hated because they get fire blight really bad, and we put in an ironwood. We were able, with the rain garden dirt, to give it a nice mound for drainage. Because as you see, my yard's very flat. And it's kind of limited what natives like to grow on flat clay. So this also shows, as the rain garden evolved, we started putting some more rocks in there because the mulch floats up, and it was looking really ugly. And so we put the rocks in the bottom, and this is from early spring. You can see mud from where rain has soaked in. And this shows the ditch in that same first year. A lot of new plants. I don't quite know where I put that in. And here we are in spring, and our 9-mark's blooming, and the dogwood's getting ready to bloom. You can also see blooms on the elderberry, which is planted behind there. The elderberry predated this, but it was totally thrilled that very close to it, we were having all the rain from the back of the house percolate into the ground. And the elderberry really took off. I couldn't resist this slide of the 9-bark. It's a beautiful shrub, and it has been declining recently, so I'm not sure if it's losing out to competition, if the drought's been too hard on it, or just also as the elderberry has grown, this has gotten more shaded. But there's a certain amount of this that happens in gardens. There's unpredictable evolution of your plant community. And this is fall of the next year. You can see how big the grasses have grown. And I know it's fall too because elderberry has lost its leaves. Another view from the same year, and this has a very good year of the mound, and view of the mound, and you see that the mound is kind of the reverse image of the rain garden. And one of the reasons we want the mound and the tree there is to screen off those our recycling bins and such. And the tree has grown a lot too. And these early pictures give you a better idea of the structure. Now here we are in the next spring. And this is where we saw a big jump in growth on the elderberry. And this is typical of native plants, right? They all look a whole lot bigger and bushier than they did the year before. because I was going to say, are we ever going to not have to look at that ugly grate? And here we are in summer, and things have filled in more. And this is a summer picture too, where you can see that looking up towards the house, you see the drainage ditch and how the calyxes have grown in the drainage ditch. And we had a really gorgeous California evening primrose, which did its prima donna thing and looked gorgeous for a couple of years and croaked. Showing, I just wanted to have some pictures here of showing growth over time. And I know I was warned about the creek dogwood, because the creek dogwood, the California dogwood, is a suckering plant. And I knew I would get a thicket there. Eventually you do have to prune it. I was like, oh, everything looks great. But, so in fall, we did trim the grasses, we kind of neatened things up a bit for fall. And the dogwood has grown significantly, so it's starting to hide the grate. And here is spring 2014, even though this was after a fairly, because here we are into the drought, but there was enough rain that winter that I got, there was a lot of growth, and the garden looks really good. And the 9-bark was doing quite well. It's really just this year where we've cut back all the water significantly that's been declining. Or it got shaded out, or the 9-bark and the dogwood don't get along. I mean, it's... So here, this is a recent picture, and it shows how it's getting a little shaggy. I added a plant, I think last spring, or 2 springs ago, this California rudbeckia, which you see on the right.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's kind of right on the edge of where the water typically comes, and it's really happy.
How tall is that?
It's it gets up as like this.
Mackerel. Okay.
So it likes a somewhat wet location.
Okay. Yep.
It will grow in less wet things, but it's a lot smaller.
Yeah, mine's only about 4 or 5 feet.
So this is a good illustration of how I have some pruning things to do on the rain garden. And I do need to restrain the grasses. And I guess that's one thing I've learned, is that you really do have to cut your grasses back hard, or they get, as they mature, they get kind of ugly. But alkali sacchaton has really, really beautiful, I guess the technical word is inflorescences, and they nod in the breeze. And it's an extremely beautiful grass, and I've grown it part in my yard where it's a little hotter and drier and just hasn't really achieved its potential. On the edge of the rain garden, it's extremely happy. And the other thing that you have to do with maintenance for rain gardens is this tendency, well, basically gravity means that depressions like to fill up. So one does have to periodically kind of rake the mulch, and some leaves like to accumulate in there. I mean, you could use a blower. I tend to hate blowers, even though we have an electric one, and I would rather use a hand rake. But haven't really done a lot to this. Okay, so I mean, it's been in for almost 5 years. I'm saying it's time to do some serious maintenance. So that, I think, does illustrate that rain gardens are actually pretty low maintenance. We do our annual cutback, and it probably would be easier if I did an annual rake out. I'm going to try and remember to do that. And this is another one of those pictures I took when the rain was coming in, and I'm hoping that this is a harbinger of the year to come, where I have once again another busy year for the rain garden, which means I have to get cracking on my cutting back while before it starts filling up. And that is my presentation. I want to talk about some handouts that we have. We have, some of this information is in this landscape designs for stormwater management, which is over there. And these are from the Water District and the Watershed Management Group. And then an even shorter one page with watershed friendly techniques. And I am now available for questions. Yes.
How deep is your,
How deep is it?
It
It's,
is, I guess.
the base is 2 feet. I mean, the bottom is 2 feet. It's not too, you don't want to have too sharp of an angle. So it's kind of, you want, because if it's too sharp of an angle, you're going to have more stuff falling in. And that's the other importance of plants, and especially grasses around the edge, because grasses have great root systems, and you really want them to get established because they will hold a slope.
so how far across would you say with your, like, level with your DG path area, how wide is it then?
More water coming down in the winter. And I think the reason is because it doesn't run off our DG and gravel surfaces very much. So if you, because frequently in rain gardens, what you see when you have above ground downspouts, in fact, is there an easy way to go back? Let's see. Steve, I need your help. Okay, I'm going to go to the second slide. Okay, here we go. in this picture, well, actually, well, there were other pictures where typically people often have like a swale, an above-ground channel running from their downspout into a percolation area. And in that case, you've got water running through that channel whenever there's a big enough rain. In fact, what happens with those swales then is you can have a lot of water-loving plants that really love it. There's one at the Striping Arboretum, or whatever they call it these days, in their California garden. There's kind of a dry stream bed that actually has water flows in the winter. So in the spring, it's covered with what is it?
Meadow foam.
Meadow foam. It's covered with meadow foam and baby blue eyes because it's a rocky area, the water kind of soaks in, and it's just wonderful for water love, the spring annuals. That's kind of what I was hoping for, but in my yard that's just not going to happen. But I mean, that's one of the things I want to emphasize with rain gardens. I'm talking about how we did it, but because you're thinking about how water moves across the landscape, to a certain extent, there's principles that can be followed, but you have to look at your site and take pieces, think about what works with the way your land slopes with, and you could have like a channel. If I had a channel where water from a downspout flowed, my stream orchid would be extremely happy because it would get that water all winter long. And that's very typical in rain gardens. This is a slightly atypical rain garden because of the buried downspouts. And also because the yard's really flat. And if you look in this book too, it's easy. They also talk about how you can do swales and things when you have more of a slope, some of the design issues. So it's simpler when you don't have too much of a slope, but even on sloping ground, you can direct water and have it infiltrate. Sometimes it takes a little more engineering. Yes?
You have some other construction there with your raised beds and everything. Did you isolate the cost of just the rain garden, and can you tell us how much that was?
I did not isolate the cost, but I can tell you that we could have put in, if we didn't have the buried downspouts, we could have done the rain garden pretty simply, or maybe hired a teenager to do some of the digging. Because if you're just having like a channel from a downspout going into a depressed area, it's extremely low tech. This was.
And with the irrigation and everything that you have.
Well, yeah, you have to put in but that's a small area of irrigation, and some people just put micro sprays along the top. So that's one of the other benefits of a rain garden, is that it's pretty easy to do it yourself, and it's pretty inexpensive under most conditions for people to have it done. It's cheaper than cisterns or anything like that. Yes?
I wanted to mention, we have another video by a guy by the name of Alan Hackler. He has a company called Bay Maples, and he specializes in doing these things. I did a sort of a rain garden that's really just a swale by the side of my house and sloped the ground away and covered it with rocks and DG, or in my case, I think I used base course. And I think the total cost for that was under $400. But I did my own work. So that's just parts, no labor, because I don't cheap.
And that was part of the appeal of doing this when I was talking my husband into it, is that it is pretty simple. And it's a very passive system for just getting water to sit in a place and soak in. You don't have the chance of algae and things like that you have to worry about when you're collecting water in rain barrels and cisterns. I mean, you can deal with it, but he didn't want to deal with it, so I said, let's do this. And it's always great when you have a more complicated alternative, when you're trying to do something new, and then you can say, well, this is the simple way, and it really helps people move to yes. Are there, yes?
Yeah, look, if you can go to that slide that has your chart of the size of the rain garden,
Okay.
I'm a little confused. So this talks about 4% of the impervious area. And then this handout that we get from the barrier stormwater management talks about 50%.
Well,
So that's a big difference. And
that is a big difference, and I actually don't know the answer to that. We actually did it the slow way of calculating how much volume an inch of rain from the back of our roof would occupy, how many cubic inches of rain that would be, and then figured out how big the basin had to be. So that is its volume calculations, but most like scientific calculators can handle that. I didn't illustrate it because, because my husband did, because I couldn't find the dimensions of the roof easily to illustrate that. We somehow didn't keep those.
So the thing that says 50% is the landscape area, not the rain garden. This thing here, it's so the rain garden can be smaller. This thing is saying you have your roof area and your landscape area should be about 50%, can be, I guess, up to, or should be a minimum of 50% of the roof area. But then your rain garden is
A small.
yeah, inside the landscape area. I think that's what they're saying here.
Okay, I guess they're just talking about ideally how much yard you have. If you
You
didn't,
need that much to absorb that much runoff.
right, but rain gardens can absorb in a more concentrated way.
That's what I would think, yeah.
That's what I think they're saying there, you're right, thank you. Because
Yeah.
with a rain garden, you're directing all the runoff to one spot.
Right, and if you need more volume, you could dig down and fill it with gravel or something, right?
That's right, and that's one of the other things that you can do. Like, sometimes what people would do is if you have lawn, you make a gravel, what they call a dry well. You fill a pit with gravel to absorb runoff. The benefit of a rain garden, well, first of all, I think lawns are boring. And with a rain garden, you get the chance to have a lot of different plants that you may not be able to have in your garden. It has a lot, they're interesting, and it's an opportunity for a whole set of new habitat plants. Because a lot of these like creek dogwood is I get so many butterflies, and it's very twiggy, and little birds love it. That kind of thicket that I'm growing now in my rain garden is extremely attractive to birds. And that's what you don't get with a dry well, but it's the same thing. You fill it, you dig a pit, you fill it with gravel, and then with lawns, and you can put like grasses on top of it. It's another approach. Yes.
So I just have to point out that I think that rain gardens are ecologically and environmentally sound, and lawns just aren't. It's not that they're boring, it's just that they're.
Well, they're not, but you could have a native lawn and have that
okay,
underneath. And one of the reasons why to do a rain garden, it's really so much better to use native plants is because the plants here that grow in California are used to being covered with, especially if you pick them from the right area, are used to being covered with water in the winter, and then they dry out. And one of the things to remember about, another thing, people say, why California natives, is that California is actually the driest Mediterranean climate. The other Mediterranean areas get more total rainfall on average. So, I mean, I have Mediterranean Australians in my garden in some ways because I want the winter flowers for the hummingbirds. But I would never put them in my rain garden. They can't tolerate the same regime. And I put the plants I used, it's actually, I mean, it seems like a big rain garden, but when you have all these plants to choose from, it was really frustrating. Because, you know, there's spireas, there's a lot of interesting riparian plants, and you know, you are forced to choose. And so some of these, like for example, they put a really big rain garden in LA, which I haven't seen, but I read about it in Vermontia, and I'd love to go see it. It's like practically half an acre, and so they can put a lot of plants in that. Yes?
How would fruit trees deal with being close to a rain garden?
I would think most fruit trees would like it, because most fruit trees actually want more, you have to irrigate them. And for example, my elderberry is very happy, but of course it's a California native. But you know, as long as they're not in it, as long as their roots aren't inundated, the fact that the water table should be a little higher near them should make them really happy. And for example, my lemon, that lemon tree, the 40-year-old lemon, it doesn't sit in water, but it absorbs water all winter. And the wet winters are definitely correlated with higher amounts of fruit the next year. So it seems to really thrive on that runoff coming onto it. But I think most fruit trees do need some drainage, so you don't want to get them where they're going to be sitting in the rain when it rises. So that also means when you think about overflow, you will want to make sure your overflow channel is away from them. Because if we really have an El Nino, I'll be testing my overflow for the first time. I don't think, since I put this in, we had wetter winters, but I've never had the overflow operating. So, well, I'm hoping to see it this year.
Is that just a gravity drain, or is there a pump or something?
We have a sump pump because it's so flat. It has a very slight slope, so in a power failure, it should drain, but more slowly. But my yard, the backyard is really quite flat, so it needs assistance. A little assistance to get past the driveway was important. It's kind of insurance to make sure water doesn't sit there in a really major storm event.
So yours has two pumps, one to pump the water in?
No, it's only one pump. And I don't remember the exact trick where the same pump can actually put water into the garden and operates for overflow. There was some kind of valve that was put in there to do that. That's why this is a more complicated system than most of them. That's the one problem with using my garden, this rain garden as an example. We have a very flat yard, which is a little atypical, and all the buried downspouts. Yes, Vicki?
I just have to ask you, what led you to choose the alkali sagaton?
Well, partly it was the designer suggesting it, but I had also seen that plant. When I found out it was suitable, I was really excited because I think it's incredibly beautiful grass.
It is.
And I had grown it semi-successfully, but it kind of declined because it was in a hotter, drier place in the yard. And so I'm saying, okay, I have to give it conditions more to its liking. And finding out that it's one of the plants that's good for rain gardens was really exciting. And books like this and have lists of plants, but you can go to any California native book and look at plants for wet sites. And what you want to choose is not the plants that grow in water all the time, like a tule. You want to choose plants that grow on the side of streams. So you know that they will be wet, they are frequent, because what is the typical cycle for a stream in California? Flooding and then a trickle. So these plants that grow not right next to the stream, but will grow up on the banks, can easily be in water. And then also in the summer, the stream is not there, so they have to deal with much drier conditions. So that's why I picked these things like creek dogwood, nine bark, the calycanthus, which many of the rushes and the caryxes are good for this too, but also one of my favorite perennials, the checker bloom, Siddelcia malviflora, the prostrate version, palustra, and I really love that. It goes dormant in the summer, unless we have a supremely wet winter, in which case it will keep going longer. But it goes away very neatly. It doesn't look ugly. It's just kind of, in a week, it seems to disappear. It has the most beautiful magenta flowers, and it really likes these kind of situations. And it has not been super happy during the drought, but it hasn't died, so I'm looking forward to it having a much better year. Now there's another Siddelcia, checker bloom, and one of the things, I saw pictures, it was very beautiful, the designer was saying you should do this, but I read, can be invasive. I said, I didn't really want to let it go into a wet situation. I was afraid of that. And I think that's one of the things, they counsel in most of the literature, avoid invasive plants, because some plants will really get out of control when they have a lot of water. I have been very happy with the plants I picked. They have not gotten out of control. That's one thing, is you want to read that. Can be invasive in wet situations, stay away. Unless you love reading. So, I guess if there are no further questions, thank you very much.